Today I'm going to be answering one of the most popular questions I get asked all the time, and it is about how to meet government primes. And when I think of a prime, I think of these big systems integrators, these multi-billion-dollar companies that a lot of people have heard of that are working with your customers. One of the things that I want to stress out of the gate here is it's really important, if you're going to meet these people, to meet the right ones. And the best way to do that is to actually start with the data. You probably are sick of hearing me say that all the time, but you start with the data. You find out who buys what you sell. You can use sam.gov, you can use usaspending.gov, doesn't matter. You can use a third-party bid matching tool. But once you find out who buys what you sell, the next step is always figuring out who sells to them. If you want to find a prime, you need to figure out who sells to your buyers. And all of that information is publicly available. It's simple. It's so easy to get that information. And once you have that, you will have a list of every contractor that is currently selling to your agency. And that's where we often want to start with that list and go through them, kind of figure out who you want to work with. I have a little trick here, and I want to start with this to kind of get you jump started in the whole process here. When you're doing your capabilities briefs, so if you're following the government contracting process that we outline all the time, instead of just calling the prime, you do these capability briefs. When you're doing your capabilities briefs with the small business office, with the OSDBU, with the contracting officers and all those different people, even if they're PMs and things like that, one of the ways that I like to connect with those primes is to simply ask the question, hey, I'm looking to connect with some primes that are already working with the agency. I happen to notice that ABC is working here. Is there anyone on that list that you can introduce me to? Is there anyone else that maybe I didn't realize? Because maybe you didn't pull the right report. Maybe you didn't pull it on the right NAICS codes or whatever. And they're like, oh, well, I know you had company A, but company B does a lot of work here. In fact, company B is who the program management is run through on 5 out of the 7 projects that you're going to be interested in. And you didn't know that because when you pulled the data, your data report was around a different NAICS code or a different PSC code or a different keyword or whatever it might be. So simply asking the people that are on the ground at the office you want to work with who you should work with is a great place to start. Now, look, not everybody's going to give you names. They're not always going to give you companies or anything like that, but a lot of them will. A lot of them will say, oh yeah, we're working with Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics and SAIC and this company and that company. They'll tell you all of that. It's all public information anyway. There's no reason for them to hide it. Simply ask the question and that will help you a lot. The second step here before we start reaching out is always to dig up some intelligence on a few opportunities before you reach out. Just talk to them about some of the things in their forecast. Talk to them about some things that are not in their forecast. Talk to them about the opportunities on the ground so that when you actually start to call the primes, you have something to talk to them about. I'll tell you this, and I've said this on a lot of podcasts, the worst position you can be in when reaching out to a prime is to reach out and say, hey, I'm a small business. If you ever have a need for landscaping, you should call us. You don't want to do that. You want to be in the position where you can say, hey, I'm talking to your customer about an opportunity that's on your radar and we can help you win this. That's the position you want to be in. It's very different than your handout saying, hey, if you got something, give me some work because, as you know, the government is trying to spend money with small businesses. They don't care about that. They just care about winning contracts. And that's where you've got to help make them competitive. Did you know we have our own community for government contractors? It's called Federal Access. Just visit federal-access.com/game changers and you can get 50% off your first month. This thing is packed full of all kinds of resources, templates, documents, strategy guides, everything you need to be a government contractor. And it gets you in our inner circle where you have direct access to myself and my partner, Josh Frank. So go check it out today at federal-access.com/game changers. Now let's get back into this episode. Once you have actually gone through and spoken to the small business reps, the contracting officers, all those different people, you've gotten your suggestions, that's when you start to reach out to the people on that list, as well as the people that are on your research list, because you're going to talk to both. You're not just going to talk to the people they recommend, you're going to talk to the people that are on the list. So those are two ways in order to reach out to the primes. Another way is actually going on the prime's website. So almost every single prime out there has a small business office. If they're a multi-billion-dollar company, they likely have a small business office. That small business office has a page on their website. You're probably not going to be able to find that page unless you literally Google small business office company name, and then that will direct you right to that page. That's the easiest way to find it. And once you find that, it's usually a very simple form that you fill out of your company name, contact information, who you're trying to reach and why, about what opportunity, that sort of thing. And the small business rep there should help direct you to the program or project manager at that company that's working with that agency. Now, look, if you put in really vague questions on those forms, it may take a long time to get a response. So be specific. That's one of my keys here. And in fact, at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about 3 specific things that will help you get in touch with every prime and actually get this to move forward. There's 3 things, there's 3 tricks, and I'm going to teach you those, but I've kind of given you the inside there that number 1 is about be specific, but we'll get into that in a minute. So you reach out to them, and there's usually phone numbers, emails, that sort of thing on their website as well. You can reach out and follow up that way. The next thing is you're going to go to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place to go and search company name, project manager, company name, program manager, company name, fill in the blank, like IT chief or whatever it is that you're trying to reach. A lot of times I will find the person or multiple people at a company that are likely already in my network, because I have a pretty big network. I work LinkedIn very, very heavily, and you should too. That's another podcast. I often find that I'm already connected to someone that is connected to the person I need to talk to. So LinkedIn is a great source of finding who that project or program manager is, or IT director, or whatever it is that's working on the program. And a lot of times what I'll do is just simply Google the name of the company along with the position and maybe the contract name. So if the contract has a very specific name, I'll use that in there in order to do my searching. And that's a lot of times how I will find the person that I'm looking for. Another great place to meet your primes and reach out to them is at conferences. I just wrapped up at the HubZone conference recently, and that was one of my favorite conferences that I've ever attended for meeting primes. There were so many primes there. I probably shook hands with the small business rep for no less than 25 primes while I was there. A lot of really, really great primes. Look for the conferences that are relevant to your business, your industry, and make sure you're going to those, especially if they're in your neck of the woods, and go meet the primes. It's not just a place to go and meet the contracting officers. The next one is organizations and associations. Regardless of what you do, there is an organization or association you can belong to if you're a government contractor. I guarantee it. If nothing else, there are some very broad ones that you can join. And a lot of times you don't even have to meet the requirements of what the name is. So like if it's the veterans group or 8A or whatever, you don't necessarily have to be an 8A to go to that conference. You could be working on your 8A. You could just want to work with 8As and just buy a ticket to the conference, that sort of thing, or join the organization. Now, some do have requirements, like you have to be an 8A or whatever to join, but to go to their conferences, you don't. At least not a lot of times. I'm not an 8A, and I've spoken at an 8A conference. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of insight there. When it comes to the organizations and associations, even if you're not a member, but let's say you are looking for an 8A to team with or someone else along those lines, you can reach out to those organizations and say, hey, I'm looking for someone that's a prime. It's this company or that company. I think they're part of the organization. I haven't been successful meeting them. Could you make an introduction to one of your members or another member that's working with agency, fill in the blank? Working agencies or working organizations and associations should be part of your strategy when you're trying to meet prime contractors. And by the way, prime contractors are not always multi-billion-dollar corporations. Sometimes they're $5 million companies that are the prime on a contract. So it really depends on what your goal is, who you're trying to reach, what route you should probably use, whether it's an organization, whether it's a conference, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's a small business page, something along those lines, or whether it's just reaching out directly. If they're small enough, I'll just reach out directly to whoever is listed in their SAM profile. That's a really simple way to do it. And yet there's another opportunity, right? Just looking up their SAM profile, finding out who is listed as the main points of contact and reaching right out to them. So there's another good one. Another way is webinars, and whether you're attending or speaking at a webinar, that's always a really great way to meet primes, where you're just getting yourself out there. And a lot of times primes are doing the speaking. They're networking in the groups. There's breakout sessions in webinars, and they'll break out and you might be in a group of 15 people and one of them's your prime. There's a lot of value in attending these types of events and meeting people. The next thing that I want to talk about here is the 3 most important things when speaking to a prime. So let's say you've identified who you want to talk to. You've figured out through all of these different ways how to get to the person that you're wanting to talk to. Now that you're on the hook to actually deliver something, the first thing out of my top 3 things that are most important is, number 1, you've got to be specific. When you're having a conversation, you want to talk about an agency and an opportunity. At a minimum, an agency and an opportunity. Be specific with what you're asking them. That's number 1. Number 2 is you need to be able to communicate your value to them. How are you going to make them competitive on an RFP? You need to be able to explain that, whether it's intelligence you have about the opportunity, whether it's a relationship you have about an opportunity. It could also be that you have a specific niche or skill where you're like, hey, there's only about 5 people in the entire world that understand this particular thing, and 2 of them are on my staff. There's a lot of different ways you can communicate your value. You need to be able to communicate that and how that is going to help them win more contracts. That's a very key piece. That's number 2. Number 3 is maybe not so obvious to people, but it might be the most important. It's talk next steps. You've got to talk next steps with them. And next steps don't have to be more complicated than, hey, do you have your calendar out? Let's go ahead and put something on the calendar to talk next week about this. Let's get an NDA in place in between now and then. That could be a next step. Hey, this RFP is coming out in January. It's currently October. I want to make sure we have a meeting on the books before November 15th. Whatever it is, you have to be able to talk next steps and move the ball forward. They're not going to do it for you. They're just not. So be specific, communicate your value, and number 3, talk next steps with them. Those 3 things are critical to your success when you're meeting with a prime. Kind of the last thing, which I'll talk about in a future podcast, is follow up. You've got to just continually follow up with people. Again, don't expect them to always follow up with you. Stay on them, keep following up. You may only be one item on their radar, and they may have 30 things they're tracking. You've got to follow up and stay on top of them. That's kind of almost maybe a secret 4th one, but that's good for everything. So I want to refer you now to 2 podcasts that I think will be really, really helpful. Number 1 is episode 230. That is 11 ways to reach contracting officers. If you've listened to this podcast and you're like, Mike, I get primes, but I can't reach contracting officers, that's a really good way to reach contracting officers, is the 11 tips in that podcast. And then the other podcast will help you if you are trying to elevate your brand in front of those primes. I did a podcast recently called Branding Yourself as an SME or as an Expert in GovCon. That one's episode 225. So I highly recommend episode 225 and 230. Great episodes for you to go and further the same skills around meeting and talking with these primes. It'll help you to reach more primes. And once you get in front of them, it'll help you actually on what you're going to say and your positioning and all that. The really thing I like about the branding one is if you're doing enough branding, especially on LinkedIn and other social media, by the time you meet the prime, they likely know who you are, or at a minimum, before you meet with them, you can send them some stuff so they can review who you are, whether it's your book, your podcast, your stuff online, some of your material, whatever it may be. There's some stuff you can go put out there so they'll know you're the real deal. When you're trying to convince a prime to work with you, that's probably one of the hardest things is convincing them that you are the choice they should go to every single time they need somebody to help. Remember, number 2 on my list earlier was communicating your value. Communicating your value is really, really big. When you can not only communicate it, but provide social proof of it, that's the game changer for you to get them to choose you over every other contractor that does what you do. I really hope you enjoyed this episode of Game Changers for Government Contractors. If you have a suggestion for a topic or a guest, please reach out. We are always looking for new guests, new topics, and things that you want to hear about. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next episode.